Hello and welcome to my webinar where you are going to learn about the 6 gears of creating engaging presentations. I'm Dr. Echo Rivera, but let's talk about you. Let's make sure you're in the right place. So let me ask you, does this sound like you? Have you ever struggled to share dry educational information in engaging ways? I'm guessing yes. I think we have all struggled with that. And I'm wondering, have you ever wanted to do better than the status quo of death by PowerPoint, but you just didn't know how? Maybe you didn't know where to start. Maybe you felt like it was taking forever. Or maybe you're trying a lot of things, but it's just not working. Does this describe where you are right now? Or maybe because of everything that's been happening this past year, you've been struggling with how to create engaging presentations, regardless if it's in person, whenever those happen again, or webinars, so something that is synchronous, or whether it is a course video or pre-recorded video, something that is asynchronous, right? So things like, what adjustments should I make? Or when should I make them? Or how do I actually make those adjustments? So does that explain where you are right now? If so, you are absolutely in the right place. If you apply what you learned today about the 6 gears of creating engaging presentations, you will be able to create better presentations than the status quo, regardless if it's in person, online, or through a video, and even if it's dry educational content. Okay? Before we get started, I know this is, a webinar, and especially because it's recorded, you probably are used to multitasking, right? But let's do something different today. Today, I want you to take a moment and get rid of all the other distractions. Close out your other tabs. Close the door. If you're in another Zoom meeting, choose one and only watch this video. Really take this time for yourself because this is going to help you create better presentations, which I'm guessing is something that you do a lot. I also recommend that you take notes. There is a handout for you. It was in the emails. As a quick warning, I do kind of go fast, but this is a video. So pause anytime you want so you can take those notes and use it as a reference later on. Okay, one more thing before we get started. By now, you're probably wondering, wait, who even is Echo Rivera? Like, who is she? Why is she doing this? Right? You might be asking questions like that. So I'm going to take a quick moment just to talk about that. So again, hi, Dr. Echo Rivera. 3 quick facts about me. I have a PhD in community psychology, which is kind of like a degree in community-based participatory research. It's a research degree. And I worked as a research associate at a nonprofit research and evaluation center that was not affiliated with a university. And together that totals like 14 years of research and evaluation and academic experience. But now I am a PhD turned presentation specialist, where basically all I do is help academics, scientists, researchers, evaluators, like people in this group of, education. I help you create better presentations. So how did that happen? A lot of people are like, what? It's so weird. So my path to get here has been really long and strange and difficult with lots of twists and turns. I explain more in the handout, but just as sort of a quick nutshell, I started out terrified of public speaking. I coped with that with an excessive amount of energy into my presentations. And then after many years of that, I kind of just figured out how to create engaging presentations based on a framework. And that helped me create better presentations and faster. And I've just kind of refined that into the system, which I am showing you today. So yeah, lots more detail in that handout. But basically, I had a very difficult time getting here. So today I love giving presentations. I love creating presentations. I'm confident in my public speaking skills, and my audience typically enjoys my presentations. I hope that you enjoy it as well. And basically what I'm doing now is I'm passing the torch to you. I struggled so hard to get here, which again, I talk about in the handout, and I I didn't want anybody else to struggle like I did because it's unnecessary. I'm here to share what I've learned with you. And I just wanted to talk about that very briefly because I wanted to emphasize to you a few things. One, I was not a natural at public speaking. Okay. I was terrible at first. I hated it. It made me throw up, like all sorts of things. Okay. I also did not start out making well-designed, beautiful, visually engaging presentations. No, this is what my presentations looked like back in grad school, okay? So I don't want you to ever get trapped in a myth about how, Echo's always been great at this, so that's why she can do it. No, definitely not. I absolutely understand what it is like to struggle, and I know how to help you. Okay. That's really my point, that my framework works not just for me in my head. For years, I've been sharing my framework with others and helping others. So for example, here's Sarah Hellison, who said, after she took my program, Blast Off to Stellar Slides, which we'll talk about later, but she said, public speaking isn't torture anymore. It's becoming one of my favorite parts of the job. I'm excited to share my work, and I feel like I'm finally doing it justice. Oh my goodness. I want you to pause this video and take a moment to write down your reaction to that and to really think through, what would it mean for you to love presenting, to have confidence, to know that your audience is going to enjoy your talk? Or if you're struggling with presenting right now, how would it feel to not have it be torture and to finally feel like you're doing your work justice? I mean, really take a moment to think about the why. Why do you want to learn this? What impact is that going to have for you? Okay, so hit play when you're ready to continue. Okay, let's begin. We are going to start with the 6 gears of creating engaging presentations, my framework. So what is the first gear? Woo! It's storyboarding and scripting your presentations. Not exciting. You're probably not excited about this, but hear me out, okay? So let's start with the basics. What is a presentation storyboard? Well, it's basically step 1 of the framework. It's the first thing you do when you work on your presentation. Before you open up PowerPoint or whatever it is that you're using, you do this before you open up your slide app. You take a moment to plan out your content. So in a sense, it's kind of like an outline. Maybe you've done an outline before, but personally, outlines never worked for me. And I think it was because they were a lot of text. So a storyboard is actually a much more visual way to organize your presentation content and to think through what you want to share ahead of time. Okay. And just that change from text only to visual is surprisingly helpful. So that's a storyboard. Now let's talk about a script. I'm guessing this is not a new concept to you, but just to make sure we're on the same page, basically it's the key points that you want to say for each slide. It includes transitions from one slide to the next because those are so easy to forget. Am I right? And what I do want to make sure we talk about is that it's in the notes section of your slide app, like I'm showing you here in that picture, right? That's the notes section in PowerPoint. Okay, it's not some like giant Word document that you've printed out. I don't even like note cards. I like to have it in that slide in the notes section. And this may be a relief. Hopefully you're happy to hear that I'm saying this. You should not memorize your script. I really recommend you do not try to memorize your script word for word. That's not quite what it is, okay? Okay, so again, I feel like this probably isn't new to you, but maybe you're wondering, well, why? Why should I do either of these things? So we'll talk about that. The reason you need a storyboard and at least have some idea of what you want to say, your key points, is so that your very first presentation draft is better, okay? Do you ever feel like it takes forever, forever to work on your presentation, okay? Come on, we've all been there. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which we'll talk about quite a few of them today. But one of those reasons is probably because your very first draft is messy, chaotic, not fully organized, and you don't fully have an idea of what you want to say. So you spend a lot of time editing and going back and forth. So if you just have a storyboard and a script to sort of begin with as you're first working on it, you will save so much time and energy because that first draft will be better. It also makes sure, having both a storyboard and a script, make sure that your talk has all the information that it actually needs. If you don't take the time to think this through in advance, you are more likely to leave out important pieces of information, right? For example, if you're teaching others, right, you're here, I'm assuming, because you're teaching others, you're sharing information with others, you probably have the curse of knowledge, which is basically we kind of forgot what it took to get us to this point. We forgot those sort of like little mini steps in between. And those are just, if you're just kind of winging it and not doing a storyboard and script, those are the things you're going to forget. And those are the things that are going to make your audience confused. So it helps you remember all of those things so that curse of knowledge doesn't stop you from creating a presentation that's easy to follow and understand. Okay? Storyboarding and scripting is also a way to make sure that your presentation is not a data dump. Okay. We have so much to share with people, right? I mean, have you ever struggled with, oh, this is really interesting. I really want to include it. I'm not quite sure where it fits, or maybe you struggle with what information to keep in and leave out. Okay. We've all struggled with that. That's where a storyboard helps, because if it's not fitting in your storyboard, well, it doesn't belong in the presentation. You leave it out. So the storyboard is like your roadmap to knowing what actually makes sense for that presentation or not. So super helpful, I promise. Okay, so storyboard and script are key first steps when you're working on your presentation. So now let's talk about the most common mistakes people make with this step. Well, most people don't do it. They just completely skip it entirely. Is this you? It's okay if it is. You're not alone. That's why I'm talking about it. And, I get why. I get why people skip the storyboarding and scripting phase. Sometimes it's because people don't even know it's a thing to do. So I don't know, maybe that's you. Maybe you were like, oh, I've never actually really heard of a storyboard before. So it's new. Okay. This term is used a lot in TVs and movie shows, but maybe you never thought, oh, that actually applies to an academic or scientific presentation. Okay. And then there's another reason where maybe you knew that people were doing this thing of like storyboarding, but you just didn't know how to create one. And then another reason people don't do it is because it can feel like an extra step that you have to do. And when we procrastinate, it seems like, no, we don't have time to do this. We need to skip right to the presentation because it's in 3 days. Okay. So those are kind of the main 3 reasons that I see. And I want to take a deeper dive into this one, this myth that it's an extra step and not a necessary one. Okay. Thinking about storyboarding and scripting as an extra step, one that can be skipped instead of being necessary, is kind of like getting in your car to go for a hike. And we all have Lamborghinis, am I right? Normal car that we have. But you don't take the 30 freaking seconds to set your GPS because you really want to get to the hike. You're in a rush, you're running late, and you're pretty sure you remember how to get there anyway, even though you only went once last year. So of course, what happens? You get lost several times, and then you end up turning your GPS on anyway, and then you get to the trail like 45 minutes later than you would have if you just used the GPS in the first place. Totally not speaking from experience here. Definitely not. Completely random example that I came up with. So yeah, your storyboard and your script is your presentation GPS. Tell me, pause this video and think for yourself. Do you want a presentation GPS? So your storyboard and your script is like your presentation GPS. Do you want a presentation GPS, even though it's hard to say? Presentation GPS. All right. Hopefully, yes. And, so keep that in mind. The next time you work on your presentation, take some time to create that GPS so the whole process goes faster. Now, I will sort of give you a little notice here that there's a whole technique behind storyboarding your presentations and scripting your presentations so that your audience stays engaged. And so you can sort of create a good GPS that you can follow. We don't have time to go into that today because I want to cover all 6 gears, but that is a strategy you learn to do in Blast Off to Stellar Slides. Okay, so you've learned the first gear, storyboarding and scripting. So what is the next gear? Okay. The next gear, which I'm so excited to share with you, is you're going to automate the boring stuff. Yes. Don't you want to automate things, right? Yes. All right. So what do I mean by that? All right. Well, first, I have a little activity. I want you to pause the video and write this down. I want you to take a minute or two and think about what you personally find really boring when you're working on your slides. Like when you're doing this thing, like you're just kind of like, oh, this is so tedious, so boring. Okay, when you have that kind of feeling. All right, so write that down and then hit play when you're ready to talk about this some more. All right, ready to continue? Here's what bores me. So I'm wondering, maybe we have the same things here. Changing the font types and sizes and colors for just like regular body text. Changing the font types and sizes and colors for text boxes. Oh, boring. Adding appear animations to this type of like text slide. Ugh. Changing the fill colors and outlines of shapes. Oh my goodness. Okay. I was getting so bored with these tasks because they were just so tedious. And I was like feeling like this was just such a waste of my time. And I just thought, if only there was a way for me to not spend time on these types of boring tasks. Wouldn't it be great if it could just be automatic? Well, I eventually learned it is possible. What? PowerPoint lets you automate the boring stuff. And let me tell you, this was a game changer for me when I was working on presentations. Okay, so it's things like you can sort of, you go into PowerPoint, you change some settings, and it will do things like, all right, you know what I've decided? I don't like my heading color. It's pink right now. I want it to be purple. So you can go into PowerPoint and you can say, all right, change this heading to purple, and you do a couple clicks, and then it changes the heading to purple for all headings in your presentation. Amazing. And it applies to all sorts of basic formatting, font type, font sizes, right? All this stuff that I have here, you can pretty much automate it in PowerPoint. So why would you want to do that? I feel like it's probably not a secret that we all want to save as much time as possible, right? And again, if you kind of came into this, if right now you're feeling like it takes you forever to create your presentations, well, this is one of those things that will speed it up. Okay, so that's why you want to do it. Now, to me, that of course, obviously sounds fantastic, but let's talk about some common mistakes that I see people make, including former me. Okay, I used to make this mistake, which is why I know it exists. Okay, basically, people don't do it at all. They go through and manually do this kind of stuff, right? How often have you clicked a slide, changed the heading, clicked the next slide, changed the heading, clicked the next slide, right? Over and over again, manually doing it. Okay. And this especially happens when we merge slide decks together, right? It's like one of the most frustrating experiences. So most people don't take the time to set up a custom master slide deck. But if you use these PowerPoint settings, it would be automatic. Okay. So again, that does not need to be your life. You could do things like use a combination of settings in the PowerPoint master slides so that in just a couple of clicks, the changes you make are applied to every single slide. So not doing this, in my opinion, not automating the boring stuff, to me is kind of like using a regular manual vacuum when you have a Roomba sitting in your closet, okay? Luckily, it's totally free to automate this stuff. It does not cost you what a Roomba costs you. Okay, you do have everything you need sitting there. So automating the boring stuff is like having a presentation Roomba. Do you want a presentation Roomba? I hope so. All right, well, so there you go. So you're storyboarding and scripting, and you're automating the boring stuff. Those two things together are going to speed up your presentation design and make your first presentation draft way better than ever before. All right, let's talk about the third gear. Ooh, this one is going to scare you. This one is designing using blank slides. Okay, hang in there. It's not as bad as you think. So let's start with the basics. People ask how I design my slides. Well, what I don't do is, well, for one, I don't use smart art because look, it's actually not even supposed to be showing up right now. So it's kind of funny that smart art just sort of made a mistake already. So yeah, I don't use smart art for multiple reasons. I also don't use design ideas, smart art. See what it's doing? Like, that's so perfect. I didn't even plan that. It literally just happened. And I'm not editing it out because I want you to see. I also don't use any slide templates. All three of these are your enemies, okay? For realsies. I've declared a nonviolent war on these three features, not because I'm a stuck-up jerk, not because I want you to spend forever on your slides, but because if you use these, you will never be able to fully create an engaging presentation, the type of presentation that I know you want to be able to create. And B, it actually can take more time, especially because of weird glitches like we just saw where they don't actually work properly anyway. So they're not a time saver and they make your presentation look kind of bad. Okay? The secret to creating memorable, engaging presentations that resonate is to have the ability to design from a blank slide. Most of my slides start as a blank slide. Okay, so again, if you want to make modern, sleek, professional, and visual presentations, this is something you need to be able to do. Again, before you panic, just hear me out, okay? I know you're already coming up with like all sorts of reasons that this is just not possible. Oh, Echo, that's going to take forever. Or no, I'm not a creative, or I don't have graphic design skills. No, don't listen to those excuses because I have zero doubt that you would be able to do this. Zero. So hang in there. Why do you need to be able to do this? Well, first we need to talk about why design templates are so bad and why they're your enemy. So to do that, to explain why templates are so bad, we're actually going to go and do a crossover with the user experience and user interface field. Yeah. Okay, why? Because UI, UX applies really well to presentation design. When I look back at when my presentations really took off, when I started to get a lot of compliments, it was when I started to prioritize user or audience experience with my presentations. So it really is that simple. The more we can pull from user experience, the better our presentations will be. So according to UX and UI, you use a template when you have little to no user interaction, when the content is not varied, and when the content does not need to be displayed in different ways, okay? That's it. Like, that's when you should use a template. Notice you don't see things like when you don't have graphic design skills, when you need to save time, right? Those are a lot of the reasons we think we need templates, but that's not when you should use them, surprisingly, okay? But let's go deeper. Let's go through each of these and think and really analyze, does that apply to the type of presentations we give? Well, presentations are actually very interactive. Even if you don't actually interact with your audience and it's just a lecture, which I don't recommend, but let's just go with it. Your audience still needs to engage with the information, right? They have to process it. They have to take notes on it. They have to store it in their memory. That counts as high interaction. They're not just passive. We also have extremely varied content with our presentations. We have introductions, methods, results, case studies, activities, conclusions, scenarios, examples, metaphors, analogies, right? All sorts of different types of content. So we have a lot of variation here, okay? And I'm sure there's more. Hopefully I just made my point. All right. And finally, presentations have information that needs to be displayed in different ways. Sometimes we need to use text. Sometimes we need to use a stock photo. Sometimes it's a visual that we create. Sometimes it's a graph. Sometimes it's a meme or a GIF or a video or a combination. All right. So presentations, the ones that we give, do not meet these criteria. Okay. So that's problem number one. But here's the thing. I do not mind breaking the rules if it would actually make slides better, okay? But here's the problem, is that design templates don't actually make the slides better anyway. So think about it. When you use design templates, you're trying to automate your slide design, okay? And what that means is you don't really have much choice but to do things like, okay, so step one is here's my template. Step two is how do I make my content, my goals, my context fit that template? All right. So in other words, when you use design templates, you're trying to fit a round peg in a square hole, where templates are the square hole and your presentation content is the round peg. Okay. So what we need to do is just throw out the idea of templates entirely. What should happen instead is you start with, here's my content, here's my goals, here's my context, right? And then you make the design fit that, right? Like, it's so simple, isn't it? And this has a name in the UX UI field. It's called content specific design, which I absolutely love because that is the core of how presentations should be created. Okay. With content specific design, your starting point is always the content or the context of your presentation, right? For example, when I needed to create a visual to talk about storyboarding, I started with, okay, I need a visual to talk about storyboarding, right? And then I started with a blank slide and I created this. I made this graphic, right? And I promise it was not that difficult. Whereas if I started with a Smart Art template, this is the closest that they had. But look at the difference, right? Do you see the difference between the two? So it might be hard to see at a glance. So let's break it down. So one, in Smart Art, I can't really control the size of the rectangles easily. And I wanted 2 columns under each key point, but Smart Art only gives me 1. And there's like more space in between the rectangles in the Smart Art one. It's more tall than it is wide. Like, there's just kind of like a lot of little things where it actually wouldn't have worked for what I wanted to show you, which means I would have had to have changed my content to fit the Smart Art template. Okay, it doesn't work. Let's do another example. I created this using a blank slide. Okay. And again, I just used PowerPoint features to do this. I did not have to go to Adobe or anything. Okay. This is just PowerPoint. If I started with Smart Art, this is what it would have looked like. Blah. Right? Like, do you see how it's just like so much cheesier and it looks very generic. It doesn't look very nice. And here's the thing. I had 6 gears. But the Smart Art template only gives me 3. So I actually had to like duplicate it and use 2 of them. And then, it got me thinking, well, what if I only had 5 gears? Or what if I only had 4 gears, right? Smart Art isn't flexible enough this Smart Art wasn't flexible enough to allow that. And those arrows, like, why are they there? That's so weird. They're just like going in all these directions. I think the purpose was to get people visualizing like that the gears are turning, right? Kind of a cue. But it's like, well, why not just like animate it? Like, and that's what I've been doing. Like, I actually show you the gears kind of trying to turn. Okay. So if I wanted to do something like that with Smart Art though, it like, it wiggles the whole thing. It looks so goofy. Where again, look, I have just the gears we're talking about, or we have talked about, they're trying to move. And that's gonna make sense towards the end, but right, they're like trying to move, okay? So yeah, way better when I just made this using a blank slide. So this is a new way of thinking about presentation design for a lot of people. This might be very new to you. So let's just talk a little bit about the common mistakes I see people make, or more reasons that people have for using these types of things. So most people think slide templates are good to use because it adds visual interest. Another thing I hear is that people feel like these types of things are a really good starting point. Okay, it's like better than text. It at least sends me in the right direction. And I also hear people say that they think it's better than no visual at all. So again, it's like, well, it's at least not text, right? So those are the three common things I've heard. Have you felt or said any of those? If so, it's totally normal. But I really want to emphasize, and we have to move on, so I'm not going to talk about this anymore, but none of those are true. So you can actually add visual interest with well-designed text, and that would be better than smart art, I promise, or templates. And these actually send you in the wrong direction. So they don't actually help you even learn design skills or, help you create something that you can build on later. Literally, when you take my training or when I work with you, the first thing we do is literally delete all of these and start from scratch anyway, because they do not send you in the right direction. It's literally the wrong direction. But okay, so hopefully, I know if you've been using these for a really long time, you might not be totally sold yet, but still hang in there. Because just one more analogy to make. To me, using design templates for presentations is like buying a suit off the rack that makes you look frumpy and outdated when you could have a nice, fabulous, tailored suit that makes you look fabulous, okay? And I'm not telling you this to be mean. I'm telling you this because I want your presentation to look fabulous, okay? So I want you to ask yourself, do you want a presentation that looks tailored and fabulous? I hope so. Okay, and you are probably panicking right now because you're still thinking, okay, but blank slides sounds like it's going to take forever. Okay, so I just want to mention very briefly that blank slides does not necessarily mean you're starting from scratch. Okay, so just take that sigh of relief. You're not literally starting from scratch every single time. We're going to circle back on this with the last gear, okay? But just in case you're sort of, getting worried, you probably don't believe me. And you probably need to hear it from someone else that my strategies do not actually take you forever, even though they might sound like it. So Dr. Rebecca Stone took Blast Off to Stellar Slides and said, it's so much quicker to make slides using Echo's methods. I used to spend so long trying to fit all that text in a slide, tweaking the font size, deleting extra words. Now it's just like cool picture, big fonts, no fear of adding extra slides for highlights and transitions. Okay. So, you can hear it from someone else that this actually does not take a huge amount of time. All right. So we're halfway. You now know 3 gears. Yes. All right. Now you know how important it is to be able to design using blank slides. What could the next gear possibly be? Ooh. Well, this one, which will not surprise you at all, is use less text and more good visuals. Of course, we're going to talk about this. Why would you do it? I feel like you already know the answer, don't you? Right? You're smart. So, pause the video and write down 2 reasons at least why you think it is important to have less text in your presentations and more good visuals in your presentations. So go ahead and do that and then hit play when you're ready. All right, so hopefully you have your reasons. Here's the ones that I wanted to share with you. When you use less text and more good visuals in your presentations, your audience is much more likely to pay attention to you and not their email and not TikTok, not Instagram, not Twitter, not Facebook, right? They're more likely to pay attention to your presentation. They're more likely to actually understand what you're saying. So if you have dry, educational, complex information to share or data, this is super important. It also means they're going to be much more likely to be able to store that information into their long-term memory. In other words, they're more likely to have that information find a home in their brain. And best of all, they will be more likely to actually use the information later on. I mean, that's the dream, right? I mean, that's why we're giving presentations. So less text on your slides and more good visuals will help you make that happen. Okay? I mean, let's compare and contrast. If this were a standard presentation, I would have done something like this. Right? I even got the clip art. Okay? Right? This is kind of like an all text standard slide with a visual that is not good. Okay? So imagine if this entire presentation looked like that. Would you even still be watching? Would you still be here? Okay? Maybe, but the experience probably would be a lot worse, and you'd probably be a lot more encouraged to be doing other things at the same time. So that's why. I don't think I told you anything new though, did I? Did you come to this presentation training thinking that walls of text were better than visuals? Doubt it. So what are the mistakes that I see people make? Well, the first mistake is that people know it's not good, but they do it anyway. And there's a lot of reasons for it. I think you know the reasons, you have the reasons, but it doesn't change the fact that this is what everyone hates about our presentations. They're walls of text. They're completely unengaging, confusing, overwhelming, and boring. Okay? And, a lot of people think that, academics expect walls of text, and therefore that is the reason we should have walls of text. I'm not really going to get into it too much, but that is not true. Everybody hates walls of text presentations. Okay. And I really mean everybody when I say everybody. Scientists, academics, researchers, everybody hates presentations that look like this. So there really is no exception for the type of audience. And if you're like, nope, that's not true, I want to make sure I'm emphasizing that I'm saying less text per slides and not no text per slides. Okay. As you've seen, I'm still using text and you will still use text, but it's just, we don't want walls of text. Okay. Okay, moving on. The other mistake that I see, which is just as common, is that people choose the wrong visuals. I see this all the time. I'm still seeing clip art and word clouds. No, no word clouds, please. And most of that is caused by people using Google Images to find their visuals or websites that I recommend you avoid because they're full of clip art. And, so yeah, it can be hard to know how to choose the right visuals, which is why in Blast Off to Stellar Slides, we spend a lot of time on where to go and how to find the best visuals without spending any money. The other problem that I see is people will have good photos, but then completely ruin it with how they're designing them. Okay, it just completely loses all its impact and potential to resonate with the audience because it's just it looks bad, and it's usually because they're trying to use a design template. There's too much text. There's sort of a lot of reasons for that, but it's a common mistake I see. And I feel like I don't have to keep going on about this because you already know how bad text-heavy slides can be. But I will say that having a text-heavy slide in your presentation is like going to a movie theater, but the movie file broke, and so they just projected the movie script. Okay? You would be like, could have just read the script. Yeah, exactly. That's how people feel with your wall of text slides. So we go to see a movie, moving pictures. All right. So make your presentation much more like a movie. Don't make your audience read a script. Okay. That's Napoleon Dynamite, just in case you don't know. All right. I've reminded you about using less text and more good visuals. And now we're more than halfway. So only 2 more gears to go. What's the next one? Well, this one is about only sharing the information you need to share with your audience and designing it well. This is when we're going to talk about data visualization and presenting data. So look, data visualizations or dataviz should be clear and to the point. Always. You only need to show people what they actually need to see or learn about in your presentation. You should also never, ever, 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 ever stop with the defaults when it comes to graphs, okay? Doesn't matter what you're using, PowerPoint, Keynote, Canva, which you shouldn't be using for presentations, but that's a topic for another day. Excel, all of them are bad, okay? You have to actively redesign your dataviz. And just to make sure there's no confusion whatsoever, all of this applies to quantitative, qualitative, mixed method data, okay? I was mostly a mixed method researcher back in the day. I've done a lot of work with qualitative data. There's no exceptions for designing your slides and data well if you have a quote. There are ways to do that well, okay? So you need to follow those principles I just shared. So why should you do this? Well, it's quite simple, really. Because the instant your audience sees a graph that looks like this, they're gone. Bye-bye. This is instantly overwhelming. And it doesn't matter if you were planning on spending 10 minutes to walk them through and tell a story and you had this like amazing script to go with it. They're gone. The first impression, the instant impression is that this is too overwhelming. I don't have time for this. I'm just going to watch TikTok. Okay? Same applies to qualitative data. You can't just throw a gigantic quote at people like this, okay? Because they're going to be gone. So you have to design those well. Bad data viz is basically an instant presentation killer. And it's usually the highlight of our presentation, right? It's the big deal of our presentation. So what are the main mistakes that I see people make with their data viz? Well, tables. People share data with tables in a presentation, which you should not do. But they are everywhere. And yeah, if you have a table, 99.99% of the time, that could be turned into a graph, and it should be turned into a graph. Anything but a table. People don't like tables. I also see people create a lot of graphs where it feels like they just rushed through it. They spent as little time as possible on it. That might not be true, but what I'm saying is it looks like that. So it's the default settings. The data's not organized in a way that makes any sense, right? Like, have you ever just like taken your data output, like your SPSS or R output, and then just like graphed it in the order it was on your output? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So it's like, right, it's not like organized for us. One of the biggest mistakes I do see is people just do a data dump. They share all the data that they have. And that's a huge mistake for presentations. That's how you have an overwhelming presentations that's difficult to follow. And then finally, very few people know how to design their data in the right ways when they're presenting it. So, I still see things like too many grid lines, 3D, too many colors, borders, separate legends, titles, like all kinds of stuff in the way that they're sharing data. And it's such a shame, like I was just talking about, because, this is often the highlight of our presentation. Again, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods, data is important to us and is an important part of our presentation. That's why I specialize in working with academics, scientists, and researchers, people who often need to share data, even if it's quotes, but it's dry, complex information in the form of some type of data. And when we don't do that well, to me, it's like, have you ever started to get really, really into a story, like a book or a movie or a TV show, and it's so good. And, as the ending is nearing, you're on the edge of your seat. You're like, how is this going to end? Only to be so disappointed by the flop of an ending. And it's so bad that you're just like regretting life and regretting investing any time in reading the story or watching the show. Yeah, I'm curious. What comes to mind when I say that? Is there an ending or a finale that ever disappointed you? Because I've definitely been here. Our team had some answers prepared. So Jason's part of our team, but here's what I said. So I found the ending to How I Met Your Mother to be extremely disappointing. The season finale, series finale was just such a huge disappointment. And Jason chose Dexter. So, which I agree with. I agree with. The last two seasons were really weird. Whereas endings that we love, My choice was Justified. Absolutely loved that show. And Jason chose Battlestar Galactica, which I agree with. So, that's what I want for you. I don't want you to end on a dud. I don't want your presentation to disappoint people because of the way the data was presented. And with something memorable, something that people will remember and talk about and feel like it was worth spending the time listening to you talk. All right, we only have one more gear left, and I'm so excited about sharing this one with you because it just we're really going to touch back on this idea of saving time and having this not take forever. Okay. So this gear is all about reusing, refreshing, and recycling what you've done before. Okay. So let's go through an example of what I mean. So let's say this is your starting point for your presentation. All right. You did this. Here you go. All right. That's fine. The next time you talk about this information, you decide, I'm going to start there and then take it to that next level. Okay, so you're not starting from scratch, you're going to build on that. And you're just going to focus on a little bit of redesigning. So that it's the same information, but it's a little cleaner, easier to read, that kind of stuff, basic stuff. All right, and if you never give this presentation again, cool. It looks great, it's fine. Then you don't have to worry about it. But if you do give this presentation again, you start here, but make it better. Okay, so it's the same information, but now you're going to do things like less text, and you're going to, try to make it at least a little bit more visually appealing. If you never give this presentation again, you could stop here. Great. But if you do give the presentation again, well, then you can sort of take it to that last level of making it as visual as possible. So we're using icons. Okay. So again, do you see here? We still have text. We're still explaining our process. So it still works for academics and researchers, but it looks so much better and is going to be much more engaging and easy to follow along with. Okay. So this is what I mean by reusing, refreshing, and recycling. It's about being very intentional about never starting from scratch when you can. So why would you do this? Let's talk about some nuances here that are important. So first, what I like about making this intentional and why it's part of my framework is that because it gets you in this mindset of it's good enough to move on. Okay. If you kind of have it in your head, we're like, I'll build on it later. I'll make it better later. It's kind of like done is better than perfect. Okay. So look, this was kind of like our first step. It is still full of text. Yes. But again, it's like clean, it's simple, it's easier to read. Animations can help make this easier to follow along with, right? I have lots of strategies in my course about how to have slides that are only text look fabulous. Okay. So again, if we just need to present this like once or twice, then this is good enough to move on. All right. So the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because a lot of people are worried that what I'm suggesting in this webinar or what I'm going to tell them to do if they join Blast Off to Stellar Slides is I'm going to make them go from that first slide to that very last slide right away for every single slide, for every single presentation for the rest of their life. I don't. Okay, so this is my way of being very, very clear that no, this is about sort of like a long-term game here. And we take steps. We go through this in phases. So it took 3 entire different presentation iterations to get to that highly visual point. Okay, you start with good enough and you just build on that over time. All right. How are you feeling about that? Is this starting to feel like, oh, okay, now this is more manageable then? Okay, that's my goal. That's my hope with sharing this with you. That again, it's not from the first slide to the last right away for everything. No, we go through this in phases. Okay, now we haven't even talked about the best part. So once you have presentations that are worth getting up to this point where it's more visual, you can sometimes reuse that design for completely other presentations, like other content. I mean, look at this. For example, if you ever share a process, right? If you ever talk about a process, well, you can duplicate the slide, change some of the text boxes, maybe, remove a few numbers if there's only 6 steps, but you basically have the structure there. Okay. The hard part from designing from a blank slide is done because you have already created your own design for how to share a process. It will not work 100% of the time, but this is what I was talking about when I said blank slides do not necessarily mean you're starting from scratch every time, okay? Because if you're recycling material, you can sort of build on what you've done before, but you have the skills to customize it to that specific presentation and audience. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, obviously, everybody knows how to do this, Echo. But do you really? Is this what you're actually doing? Because most people think they're doing this, but they're not. Here's what most people do. The biggest mistake that I see is that people think they're reusing and recycling because they're using the same content. But in reality, they're actually starting from scratch over and over again with the design, okay? So this is like, let's say that you start here, right? Here's an example. This is your starting point, and you know it needs to be better. It's too hard to read. Oh, Echo told me there's no template, right? So, there's too many random designs on here. So then you just choose a different template, maybe one that's cleaner, but it's still a template and it's still full of text. And then you're like, oh, I still want to make this better, right? And then the next version is something like this. And then the next version is something like this. Like maybe you try to add a visual, but it still it has that same kind of feeling. And then maybe you experiment with smart art. Okay. So people do think that they're reusing material, but look, it kind of looks like this. If you look at the first slide and the last slide, does that actually look like a huge amount of change happened? Here, let's compare. When you're reusing and refreshing in the right way, where you're always improving the design of the information you're sharing, each one gets noticeably better from the last. And so we have the first slide and the last slide here, right? Huge difference. But when people are doing it the way that they're used to, where it's mostly just changing the template and using design templates, here's the first and the last. Do you see? Take a moment to pause the video and really just look at the difference. Like, do you see how the one on the bottom doesn't really, it is not significantly improved, even though we went through like 4 or 5 revisions. Okay. So when you start from scratch over and over again, especially with the design, to me, that's kind of like a slow, agonizing hamster wheel. Like you're spending all this time and you're never getting anywhere. I want you to get off that hamster wheel in a safe way. Okay. Do you want off that hamster wheel? Because that's what I want for you. I want every single time you work on your presentation to be better than the last, so that in 6 months, in a year, you can look and see that huge difference. Okay. And I'm going to be honest with you here. This is one of the benefits of taking professional development in how to create engaging presentations. That's what's going to help you get off that hamster wheel. It's really hard to do by yourself. Let's take a look at Dr. Casey Clementson, affiliate faculty at the University of Minnesota, and she teaches about music. So here are her slides before she took Blast Off to Stellar slides. Okay, we've got templates, some like outdated colors, just like a very outdated style. And, she was always trying to do better, but she was stuck in design templates land. Okay, and then after Blast Off to Stellar slides, look at what she was able to create. Do you see what a huge difference there is here and how these slides look so much better? And what she said was, after taking Boss, I made slides easier and faster, right? So look, before and after, the after was easier and faster. And look how much better it looks. Now, it's so easy to find effective visuals. It's easy to create a storyline of slides that flow together to make content easier for students and audiences to follow. Okay, that's the beauty of my system and my framework, is that once you get momentum going and all the gears are going, everything becomes easier, faster, and more effective. Okay, so, well. You now know all the gears of my framework for engaging presentations. Now, here is the true beauty of the system and why I chose gears to begin with as the visual representation for this framework. Because once you get each of these going, even just a little bit, right? You don't have to go to the max for every single one, but if you just do each one of these, even a little bit, everything becomes easier, faster, and more effective. It's a beautiful system that works together to help you create engaging presentations regardless of the content for any delivery format, in-person, webinar, or course video. Okay? Do you want this? Because this is what I want for you. I want you to feel like creating presentations is an easy, fast system, and it will help you create presentations you love and your audience loves. All right, let's just do a very quick recap. You need to storyboard and script because that's basically your presentation GPS. You want to automate the boring stuff when it comes to creating presentations because it's like your presentation Roomba. You don't want to use templates. You want to use content-specific design, which is like having a tailored presentation, a tailored suit. I mean, seriously, wasn't this cool, right? Like, I'm kind of in love. And, not just because it's a fun animation, but it perfectly makes my point about a system, right? If I did smart art, okay, this is what would have happened. It makes me laugh every time. Okay, so again, hopefully you are just like, you're done with design templates. Okay. Don't make your audience read your presentation script. You need to have a visually engaging presentation. You want to make sure that you present your data effectively so that all your good work is memorable in a good way. And you need to get off that hamster wheel and stop starting from scratch. Okay, you need to reuse, refresh, and recycle in the right way so that you can do things like reuse your own material and never start from scratch. All right. Okay, so now you know what to do to make your presentations engaging. I have given you the best blueprint to follow, something that took me like 15, 20 years to develop for real. So, you know what to Google now. You know what to look for in terms of tutorials, and I have tons, I've got stuff in my blog and YouTube channel. But I will say, there is a much faster and easier way to learn all of this than to try to Google and piece this together just through what is available online. All right, let's do a quick recap of what brought you here. Chances are you're frustrated with something. Okay, you're frustrated with something right now when it comes to your presentations. Even if you're good at public speaking, maybe you just want your slide design to match that level of public speaking skills that you have. Or maybe it's because you see that your audience is not engaged, or that people are asking the type of questions where you're like, I thought I explained that in my presentation, right? Signs that your presentation is actually confusing, overwhelming, and hard to follow. Whatever your reason is, you're here because you are ready to make a change. And I'm guessing you're here because you want the most simple, like how-to solution for how to do all of this, how to make your presentations better. And I'm here with you. Like, let's do it. Like, let's make that happen. Okay. Again, I want to pass this torch to you. This took me, like I just said, like 15, 20 years to really figure out. So let me speed that whole process up for you. Because look, it is your turn to experience an engaged audience. It is your turn to feel like you're not doing death by PowerPoint and your presentations are awesome. And it's your turn to just love creating presentations, okay? It's your turn to make engaging presentations with the guidance of a step-by-step system. And that system is my presentation skills masterclass. Sorry for the rough edit here, but I had to fix something. But yeah, I just wanted to end the video by saying, if you are interested in learning these skills, in learning these 6 gears and really creating visually engaging presentations, then definitely check out my online course. All the links to everything is below.